Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is WeatherBrains episode number 818. This is the pre-show. This is for September 20th, 2021. Magical time of the program where we do three things. We share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and we say very outrageous things. So you know what's got to happen here. Got to get the embed code going and get the guests invited, and we'll get this thing started. Hope everybody's doing all right. You know, this is next to last full day of summer, because fall, in terms of astronomy, begins Wednesday. And right on time, we are going to have a very impressive surface front. It's going to bring in some dry air, cool air. Down here in the deep south, we could easily be in the mid 40s by early Thursday and Friday morning, which is slightly exciting. So let's invite everybody and see if we can get this thing going here. You know what tomorrow is? Tomorrow is the 21st of September. Got to play the song September by Earth, Wind, and Fire. Do you remember the 21st night of September? And probably nobody's ever heard of that song but me. All right, so let's see if we can get everybody online. I think we're talking radar tonight. That's always fun. All right, guests are invited. We should be good to go. You see, Dancing with the Stars is back on the TV tonight. And again, it's funny. We work at these TV stations, so people just automatically think you know all about television. We really don't. I mean, we are so busy. I'm so busy. Let me rephrase it. I'm so busy. I don't have time to watch television. I mean, I am cognizant of what's on TV when we have to cut off the program because of tornadoes. I'd like to know in advance what's coming, if we're going to, get all the haters lined up and the trolls and everything. But other than that, I just, I'll watch a little football on the weekend, and that's about it. I mean, I just can't recall the last time I've had the chance to sit down and watch some TV stuff. And of course, most people, watch the streaming, services, Netflix and Amazon Prime and things like that. They binge watch all these programs. But again, it's, the time is my biggest struggle in life. I mean, everybody struggles with something, and I think that's mine. And most people know that I have not slept since 1973 to any degree, which is not healthy, by the way. But you just cut out stuff, and before you know it, you're cutting out sleep, and then you just get down to the point where there's nothing left to cut out. I mean, time is the greatest equalizer in life. Everybody, I don't care how rich you are, how poor you are, you got 24 hours in a day, and how you spend it determines who you are. And it is one of my biggest struggles, Bill. Time management.
Sorry, James.
Bill probably has it all,
because you try to put a 20-pound lump of sand in a 5-pound bag every day. That's why.
We call it that old saying where I'm from. It's 20-pound. You put 20 pounds of manure in a 5-pound bag.
I was trying to be nice, James.
Yeah. So like tomorrow, I'm speaking to some kids at 9, and then I'm speaking to the Sylacauga Rotary Club at noon. And as life kind of normalizes, I'm kind of getting back into this, and really during the COVID thing, it was wall to wall, but it was online. You just do it at home, which doesn't require travel and everything else. And now you have to hop in the car and go, which I would prefer to do, but I'm having to get back into that mode to where time management. Hey, Jen, did you send me an audio file by chance today?
I did. You want me to resend it real quick?
I don't think I have it.
It was at 1:26 today. Yeah, let me resend it.
You might want to resend it. So Aubrey is in, but she can only do the first 30 minutes. Okay, I just got your email, Aubrey.
Yeah, I'll be until about 9:30.
She's in charge of the guests if Kim doesn't show up. But if Kim doesn't show up, we won't have any guests.
She'll be here. No,
Well, we'll have Dr. Boyd. And there she is, as if spoken on cue.
I just sent it to you, James.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
That was the only missing piece of the, there it is. I probably have it, and I just, like I say, it's, Mondays are a struggle sometimes. All right, so I do have it.
Okay.
I'm going to drop it in the soundboard so we can play it easily.
All right. And
we'll be good to go.
Can you hear us, Dr. Boyd? We can't hear you though. Now we can hear you.
Okay, I have a microphone. Maybe it would help if it was a holding it,
filter
right?
and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I have one of these fancy things. So do I need to adjust my volume at all?
Mr. Sound Mixer, what do you say? Yeah.
Just talk to us for a minute, Candice. Just speak.
Okay,
talk to us about
one
your
of
day.
these out of my ear. So test. It's Monday, September 20th, 2021. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening.
You're good. You're good. Yeah,
right,
just as long as you can kind of leave the mic, just leave it static. You're good to go. It sounds great.
All right, perfect.
Okay.
Dr. Cloco McLean, if she can hear me. Kim, how do you want to handle the front of the show tonight? Oh, she's still miking up. I want to see if she wants to introduce her guests first, and then I'll introduce and talk to Dr. Boyd, or vice versa. Can you hear us, Dr. Cloco McLean?
Yes, I can. Sorry, I'm here, guys.
Yay.
Do you want to introduce your guests and then have me introduce Dr. Boyd and talk to her for 5 minutes and then do your guests, or do you want to do it vice versa? Where I introduce Candice and then so how do you want to do it?
Yeah, go ahead. And Candice, it's nice to see you again. Go ahead and start with Candice, and she has the early remarks anyway, and then I'll get into introductions with our radar crew. David, I'm so glad to see you on here because it means that everything did work. It's always good.
Yeah, right. I think we should have all the links coming through.
Well, I have a feeling this is going to be per pound or per minute the heaviest brain poundage we've ever had on the show in one episode.
We're gonna have a whole lot of doctors.
Yeah.
Just don't call me a medical doctor.
Right, I'm not that kind of doctor. I'm not the useful kind.
Right.
A whole lot of doctors.
I'm just the reason why you get up and have your morning conversation every day about weather. Yeah.
So you also win the best Zoom background there.
Oh, well, thank you.
Kind of ashamed of mine.
Well, I'll tell you. Oh, and maybe I need to take my Zoom background off. This is my friend. Do you see my friend back here?
No. You just have to introduce them if they appear.
Oh, now I do. I see a furry something.
Yeah, let me turn my background off. This is the reason why I have a background on. So meet my friend.
Oh no, that's a great background.
This is why.
Oh my goodness.
So I mean, I'm glad this is a podcast because look, I got cats that it's her world. It's her world. So she'll just literally just walk across and jump.
Candice, I have Cece that shows up at every show. So you'll become besties. We're in good shape. Kitties are welcome here.
All right. Okay. Well. So if I turn my background on, all of a sudden you're like, does she teleport somewhere? No, it's just a cat that I don't want you to see. Yeah. Try to be as professional as possible.
Oh no, not on this show.
Oh dear, you thought you were going to be professional here?
Yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and just
I'm sorry, professional. What do we mean by this? Hello, Candice Boyd. It has been a while.
How's it going, Troy?
It's good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Yeah, this is like the gang's all here.
Yeah,
I need to be here every Monday night. This is awesome.
You're gonna be here a lot over the next couple of months.
I know, right?
So Bill, do I bring in you first or Kim? How do you want to do this?
Talk to Kim on the go round, and then end with me like you usually do, and then I'll toss it to Kim.
Okay, all right, we'll do it that way, and y'all just take it here. So, all right, let's get the recorders going, and we'll get this thing started. Track 1 is recording. Track 2 And here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
You're listening to WeatherBrains. They're kind of a big deal.
We are kind of a big deal, ladies and gentlemen. This is WeatherBrains, episode number 818. This is for September 20th, 21. We are 2 days away from the autumnal equinox. Love the equinox, love fall. And we got a cold front coming in right on time. We'll talk about it later in the weather roundup. But Jen, I guess you're going to feel some cool air later this week, huh?
You got it. Yeah, big drop in temperatures, a lot of rain coming my way. And I just wanted to make sure everyone can see who won Saturday night. Just making sure everybody saw who won.
People in Alabama are watching this show. They're not going to
I know, making sure they all can see. What a great game that was. Oh my goodness. My alma mater.
Oh yeah. See, we could play these songs and not get kicked off.
Trudy, I'll sing. Fight on stage. Roar, lions, roar. We'll hit that line, roll up the score. Fight on for victory evermore. Fight on, fight on, Penn State.
Yes.
On the other shows, you don't get this. On the other weather shows, you do not get this.
There's a reason for that, but I mean,
Oh no! Oh, I've done a terrible job here. We have a new permanent panelist tonight, and I didn't invite him.
Don't tell him that.
Well, guess what?
Do not tell him that. Who happens to be the
officer.
former NOAA administrator is
Yeah,
telling
now y'all tell him that
unbelievable.
Do not tell him.
whole Zoom
must
thing will
have
be
been
shut
wrong
down
on his
shortly.
Maybe he won't
That's all.
notice.
I can.
He'll never
Yes.
come
I can
back.
say, yeah.
That's that whole professional thing we got going on here.
Very professional.
Oh, my
Very
goodness.
professional.
So while we're doing college fight songs, Kim, you ready to sing? Go.
Oh,
He
we
wants
have
the
other
Purdue
people who
one.
should be joining me for this.
Yeah, got a whole crew of them.
James, you might be hearing it. Is anyone else hearing it?
No, I don't hear it.
No,
I heard the first few drum beats, and that was
James
it.
been hearing it for a long time though, so it's like,
He
So
just
you
marches
guys
to the
keep
beat of
talking
his own
and
little
you-
drum.
Yeah. So everybody's got to be really quiet. Let's see if Kim can hear this now.
Can't hear it, but I'm betting
No.
it's something that would go
Yeah.
Oklahoma, Oklahoma, Oklahoma.
All right. So
We have the
He
most
keeps cutting
creative-
out. That must be YouTube turning it off.
I will say this for OU's fight song, it's very easy to learn. Although I love, if you don't know the song, it ends with "I'm sooner born and sooner bred, and when I die, I'll be sooner dead." Rocklahoma, Rocklahoma, Rocklahoma.
Wow.
And that,
Wow.
when the first time I heard that, I came out here for grad school and went to my first football game, and I went,
mhm.
"This is a different environment than I'm used to at Purdue."
Will. Troy, you want to sing the UT fight song? You got it. I don't have it queued up here. You
If
can
you
just
think
sing
for a
a
second
cappella.
this Texas Aggie will end up singing the Texas fight song, you're sadly mistaken. I love University of Texas, but and besides that, there ain't
Wow.
a person anywhere on the face of the earth that would want to hear me sing. So
All right. Aubrey, do you have a performance voice? Can you sing? Do you do
No.
vocals?
No, I cannot. I do not have a performance voice. I wish I did. I cannot sing.
no.
So I
Yeah.
will not
Yeah.
spare you the trouble.
Okay. Well, how's life in your world in Harrisonburg?
It's been busy. We had a meteor on Friday, a very big fireball. And the problem was it took several hours to diagnose because it was so cloudy out
Yeah.
that we take a look at everything beforehand and then it's like, oh, goes lightning mapper detected it. Well, we may have a meteor now instead of an earthquake. And we were able to capture a little bit on video, but had a lot of video with sound. So you could hear it. We were able to get one decent video. So NASA is still investigating that. Would have been amazing if it hadn't been so cloudy out. It would have been super bright and thousands upon thousands would have seen it Friday morning about 10:30. So that was kind of interesting.
I saw, was that the Weather Service in Pittsburgh that posted the image?
Yeah, they saw
Yeah.
the image also, and I'd already called NASA and reached out to the American Meteor Society. You know, there was a point in the morning where I'm going, do I have a contact? I don't have a contact for this. Who do I call? So I call NASA, and they got back to me right away. I would say within 2 hours. Their meteoroid specialist, Bill Cook, got back to me within about 2 hours. So that was quite impressive, I should say.
Yeah, Bill is at NASA in Huntsville, and he's the
Mhm.
greatest. He just constantly helps with the fireball stuff. He's the greatest. So, Bill Murray, do you want to apologize to Dr. Jacobs here on the show?
I was going to
go
throw
ahead,
you under
Bill.
the bus and say that you forgot to invite him, because it's your job to invite the panelists. But anyway, we're really excited here at WeatherBrains tonight because we've got a brand new guest panelist. And anytime we do that, it's like breaking a bottle of champagne on the hull of the ship. So if anybody's got any champagne, we'll break it over Neil's head here. But Dr. Neil Jacobs is joining us tonight
Yay.
as a permanent panelist. Neil, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here. I'm bummed I missed the start of it where we got to say outrageous things.
Well, you
Neil, you actually missed the scene.
No, you didn't.
And you know,
Yeah, we
you
took
would
it
have to
right down
sing
the
your fight
tubes.
song.
Yeah,
exactly.
pretty quick.
But James promises he'll do a better job next week sending you your invite, Neil. So
Great. Now it's my fault. Yeah.
well, I was
nice
so
pass
excited.
off there, Bill.
It really was good. And if y'all would have played along with me, it would have worked. But no, that didn't work. So, but I was so excited about our guest panelist tonight. Dr. Candice Boyd is a lifetime member of the National Weather Association. She won the NWA Special Achievement Award for her lifetime extraordinary leadership and accomplishment, with incredible things like do not turn around, don't drown. We say that all the time. We say it a lot more here in Alabama lately than we ever said before. So incredible awareness campaigns like that, and working hard. Traditionally underrepresented groups, she does a super job, diversity and inclusion things. And so she's running or in charge of herding the cats for the RON. Something that we all know a lot about here. The research to Operations Nexus has been part of the NWA for the past several years, and now it has expanded to include AMS participation. So we welcome Dr. Candice Boyd to the show tonight. Candice, how are you?
I am doing great. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, we're so thrilled, and I you only have a couple of minutes to talk about the RON tonight, but we're going to turn you into a panelist along with Dr. Jacobs. We got more doctors on here tonight. Somebody said earlier, whole lot of doctors, so that may be in the running for the show title. But we have dedicated the entire December 6th show to you because of your amazing career and all of your accomplishments, and looking forward to that. But tonight, remind our audience how the RON, how the RON works and how it's going to operate this year.
Sure. So the RON stands for the Research Operations Nexus, RON, and it is the ultimate event to discuss all aspects of weather. So if you've ever participated in a speed networking event or a speed dating event, then the format will be the same, but the topic is atmospheric science. So prior to the pandemic, the RON was a physical event. It was a face-to-face event either at the National Weather Association meetings or the American Meteorological Society meetings. So when you entered the room, you signed in, and there was a series of tables. And at each table, you discussed a different topic about the weather for a round. And a round could be anywhere from like 25 to 30 minutes. So participants could pick a table, sit down and chat, move among tables as they choose. And then each table had a facilitator and a note taker to capture the comments. So this year, the RON is 100% virtual, and it's the same format. It's going to be held on October 6th from 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time. And there are a series of virtual rooms that the participants can move among to discuss various topics. So we have over 24 topics scheduled, and it varies from severe weather, aviation weather, impact-based decision support services, and of course, R2O, research to operations, and O2R, operations to research. So that's just a little bit of background about the RON.
So talk for a minute about the double meaning behind the acronym, because there's something to that, isn't there, Candice?
Yeah, it really is. So the RON, R-O-N, stands for Research Operations Nexus, but it's also named after Ron Poblinski. Ron was the science and operations officer at the National Weather Service in St. Louis, Missouri. So Ron had a 35-year career with the National Weather Service. He published over 50 papers, 15 of which he was the lead author, and he's been referenced by other papers over 1,000 times. So Ron has passed away, but we keep his memory alive and his passion for connecting the research community and the operations community by having the Ron Meetup.
So Candice, it's not too late to sign up, right? So are you still looking for participants?
Yes. So look, if you're interested in weather, we want you. So the Ron registration is actually open right now. And right now it's open to anyone in the past who has participated in a Ron, anyone who is an AMS member, anyone who's an NWA member, for no cost. So you can literally go to the NWA website, that's nwas.org, and you can sign up.
Well, that is fantastic. And we're so glad you're with us tonight. We're looking forward to December 6th when we can talk all about your amazing career. But now you're being deputized as one of us. You're a guest panelist, so come with lots of questions. And we have some amazing guests tonight that I will turn it over to Dr. Cloko McLean to introduce.
All right. Sounds great.
It's great to have you, Candice, and thank you so much, Bill. I'm really excited about today's show, and I'm hoping it'll be one of those super nerdy programs that everyone learns a whole lot from, because today we're going to be talking about radar, which is something that we all use in our weather nerdery all the time, but not many of us actually know very much about how radars come to be. How do they work? And what's on the forefront of development? There have been new radars instituted in recent years that I think we're still even beginning to grapple with. How do we use them? So really this research to operations nexus that Candice was talking about is so very important in the radar world. And our three guest panelists will all talk about that in different dimensions of the work that they do with radar. And first, I'd like to welcome Dr. Caleb Fulton to the show. He's a professor of engineering here at the University of Oklahoma. And I'm really excited to have him in part because I actually knew him from our undergraduate days at Purdue. He was an engineering major. I was a meteorology major. We sort of met through friends and had no idea our lives would eventually both end up in Oklahoma, especially because he wasn't working in weather applications at the time. So Caleb, tell us a little bit about your backstory. How did you get here to Norman, Oklahoma, and what were you doing at Purdue?
Yeah, so my background at Purdue was largely, it was electrical engineering. I did an awful lot of electrical engineering when I was at Purdue without radar focus. And what drove me to radar was the applications of electromagnetics, seeing how not just Maxwell's equations and all the theory and all the little nitty gritty vector math you could do, but seeing how it had applications in radar in a way that encompassed just about every aspect of electrical engineering and other aspects of engineering too, like mechanical. Radar kind of encompassed the need to push the limits of just about every little bit of electrical engineering technology. And so I got involved, I led as a graduate student the development of a digital array radar for the Army looking to what they might field in 20, 30 years from then, just 10, 20 years from now. And they're currently working on that. But it was at the time when there was a big question about what are we going to do to replace the 88D network around the country. And phased arrays have been used in the military for decades, and they'd be great to use for weather, but there are an awful lot of challenges in the weather radar world that the military doesn't know or care about. And translating some of the technologies that we were doing, which was pushing the limits on the digital side, bringing more digital electronics into a traditionally analog world of phased array radars to make them digital, but also including extreme care for dual polarization, extreme care for horizontal versus vertical electric fields transmitted and received by the radar. And all of that came together in my dissertation to how do you get a modern digital array to do its job without spending a colossal amount of money and time on it, and B, how would you get it to do something suitable for weather radar down the road? And right as I was about to leave and go work for one of the many DoD acronyms, the position at OU, there was a cluster hire at OU to hire a bunch of radar people. And myself and Dr. Hjalti Sigmarsson from the same lab at Purdue under Bill Chappell, both ended up coming to OU. Bill Chappell at the time was at DARPA, and I was funded under a DARPA program of his to further digital phased arrays in the next couple of years. And in the years since, we are also building our own digital arrays here at OU for weather radar purposes. So that's kind of where I am.
Yeah, and it's so interesting, and this is something I think we'll get into hopefully a little bit more later in the show. There's a close relationship between meteorology and the military where radar is concerned. So seeing you come up with funding that was DoD to do radar development applications, and then having the field of meteorology say, hey, we could use those skills for different applications over here, is not something entirely unheard of. So very, very interesting background, Caleb, and we'll talk with you a little bit more in depth in a minute after we get to hear from everybody. We'll talk with you about your area of focus, which is hardware architecture. These are the literal nuts and bolts of making a radar that works. And like you said, phased arrays are a really interesting topic in radar right now. So we'll dive into that in a minute. Right now, I'd like to introduce Jim Kurdzo to the show. Jim is a colleague of yours, and he's at MIT Lincoln Labs now, was a graduate student at OU for several years. The radar world we'll come to find in this show is not very large. So having two people from a radar program at Purdue come to OU, not that strange. And then having the road between OU and MIT be very tight knit, also not unexpected. So Jim, in your area of work, you have brought together meteorology and engineering. And we're so interested to hear from you. How was it that you came through your path? What brought you into meteorology, and what brought you especially into radar?
Yeah, so I think like a lot of meteorologists, I was one of those ones who was into it since I was 6 years old. Living in the Northeast, snowstorms were my big thing. And I always wanted to be the best weather forecaster who ever lived. That was my goal. And when I got to college, I did a weather forecasting internship after my freshman year and didn't particularly care for it. And I was challenged to apply to a research experience for undergraduates position after my sophomore year at MIT, actually, at MIT Haystack. And I got the position and really fell in love with radar, actually studying climate up in the ionosphere, but really got involved with radar. So then through a NOAA program, the Holling Scholarship, I ended up in Norman at NSSL working on tornadoes. And then it just kind of went like dominoes after that. When I got into grad school at OU, I did a very interesting path. Who actually one of the other two people in the world who have done this is here, who's going to talk next, is David. I have a bachelor's in meteorology, a master's in meteorology, a master's in electrical engineering, and a PhD in meteorology. But the PhD in meteorology actually was on an engineering topic for weather radar. So it's a very unique kind of thing that you can do in Norman that David has also done. And so basically it's this combination of the weather aspect, the signal processing aspect, and the hardware aspect. And I've been really lucky to come back home to the Northeast and work at MIT and at Lincoln Laboratory. And I still work very closely with my colleagues in Norman. Most of my funding still comes from NOAA and NSSL. So.
Really interesting to hear about the landscape of what even produces all these technologies and what brings people into that work. Thank you so much, Jim. I mean, just thinking about what it takes to do all of that, I think anyone would agree, any one of these single majors is hard enough. Doing both of them takes a lot of dedication and skill. And so in that respect, I'm not too surprised there aren't too many of you. So let's welcome to the show another guest who, like you said, has a very similar trajectory. David, you're a professor of meteorology at the University of Oklahoma and focusing in radar development. Tell us a little bit about your path. You had some similar degree, wanderings as Jim did that brought you into radar, and some very interesting applications of work that you got to do in graduate school. So tell us about that.
Thanks, Kim. My interest in weather started when I was probably 4 or 5. I grew up in Kansas, and I was scared of tornadoes. Pretty deathly scared of tornadoes, to the point that I'd stare at the TV screen when there's a tornado watch and just wait or see severe thunderstorm warnings, tornado warnings coming, and that really sparked my interest in weather, because I was already interested in numbers, weather page, and once I saw live radar on TV, that pretty much got me hooked, and that slowly built me toward a career that I'd be interested in doing weather radar as a career, as even a subspecialty of meteorology. I didn't go directly into meteorology. I was a business major for my first year, which is kind of an oddity. But then I transferred to Oklahoma my sophomore year and have been on the meteorology path ever since then. I had some vision to combine the two, but meteorology ultimately kind of won out on that. Once I started working with some of the radar technology at OU, I became interested in the engineering side. We were building the atmospheric imaging radar, which is something we'll probably talk about. That's a phased array mobile radar that we developed at OU. And it was something that, as students, we had a lot of opportunities to help with the system, whether it was manufacturing it or taking it out in the field once it was completed. So got a lot of hands-on experience with radar systems that piqued my interest enough that I was interested in taking radar engineering classes in addition to kind of the bread and butter meteorology classes too. So now I did a postdoc at NCAR for 2 years, working in the Earth Observing Laboratory, working on field campaign, the Plains Elevated Convection at Night project. And then I've been at OU since, working as a research scientist in the Radar Innovations Lab.
Yes, awesome. Thank you so much. And with that introduction to all of you and your backgrounds, I would really like to hear a little bit about the major types of radars. I think that's going to help people to interpret our conversation too, because like I said, this is a technology many people use and don't necessarily know a whole lot about, and what the differences are among the different technologies. So I'll start with Jim. And Jim, I'm hoping you can tell us, what are some of the major types of radars and what are they used for?
Yeah, so let's see. In terms of the CONUS, like within the country, we have several uses. Obviously, we're all familiar with weather radar, which traditionally uses a rotating dish. It uses a high-powered amplifier. We talk about nearly a megawatt of power in either a magnetron or klystron transmitter, right? These big, powerful things. We also have radars that are of dish types for air traffic control. So we track radars at short range in the terminal, long range kind of in the CONUS airspace. And then there's things that are more like homeland security and defense and things like that span into different architectures. So rather than rotating dishes and parabolas, we end up with things like phased arrays. So the two things that I think we'll be discussing the most tonight in kind of like where technology is going is we're moving from that dish aspect. And this is really important of, you have a pencil beam. It's a thin beam. You have to go around and up and around and up and around and up to get that whole volume at high spatial resolution. The problem is that takes time. So what we're doing in meteorology is trying to move towards phased arrays, which are able to electronically scan without necessarily moving the radar. Now, you can put it on a pedestal and also do fancy scanning. You can do things like David talked about with the imaging radar, which is called imaging. And it's like sending out a flash of energy in many dimensions and then receiving many pencil beams. And so by doing that, we're experimenting with these new ways to really scan faster while maintaining data quality. And that's the one thing that I'll say about radar. There's never a free lunch. It is trade-off, 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 trade-off. You are always trying to get more speed, better data quality, and keep it affordable. And that's like the triangle of trade-off. And
You can always buy a more expensive one.
Yeah, we could spend $1 billion on a radar, but there's no one better to talk about that trade-off space than Caleb.
Yep, and that's exactly where I wanted to go. You read my mind, because Caleb, this is what you focus on all day long, is trying to optimize these systems. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so the ultimate radar, I won't go quite to the ultimate radar yet, but what a phased array radar does instead of a mechanical radar, mechanically scanning radar, is you could think of an octopus holding 8, that's as many rocks as it can hold, holding 8 rocks all in a row, and then it drops them into the water from left to right. Pop, 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 pop. The waves as they propagate out would not go straight out from the octopus. They would go out at an angle associated with him dropping all of those rocks in a row, if he was to hold all 8 tentacles in a row. And that angle at which the waves propagate have to do with the time delay between dropping the rocks and the distance between. I don't know if anyone can put this mental image together, but you can imagine pop, 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 pop in a row, and then it propagates off at a specific angle.
This is the greatest explanation of phased arrays I have ever heard.
I think it works though.
Stealing this.
And but now instead of plopping, and I go to the octopus in the water because the propagation of electromagnetic waves essentially satisfies the same second order differential spatial space-time equations that it does in water and in air with electromagnetics. What's different is with a phased array, you're typically not doing plopping. You're sending out a tone at however many gigahertz, typically 2.7 to 2.9 gigahertz for the large 88D network. And of course you can do weather radar up to 60, 100 gigahertz or beyond. But it's not plops, it's tones that last us a certain amount of time. The 88D network, it's 1/1,000,000th of a second, 1 microsecond. With military radars, they want to see further out, so they scream even louder, and they scream more complicated waveforms that could be processed, pulse compressed, to get back to very short time windows so they can distinguish between what's going on. Bats do the same thing, by the way. Bats will put out waveforms with a lot of frequency content, low to high chirps, high to low chirps, and they'll use all of the frequencies they get back to piece together through processing in their brains that they're not really in control of, it's just evolved with them, to do range resolution by looking at how the superimposition of all the waves coming back lines up. We do the same thing with radar in slightly less elegant, more throw more power and computation and techniques at it, but that's more where the DoD comes in, more complicated waveforms over wider bandwidth, so they can see further and distinguish more different types of targets. What weather radar does is it actually sends out the most basic kind of waveform, at least the 88D network does, just a single whoop, 1 frequency, 1 microsecond pulse, and it repeats that. I don't know what a typical number of pulses is. I think it's a few hundred. David, correct me if I'm wrong. Jim, you probably know as well. But it looks at the return pulses, and it can tell based on how long that pulse is coming back from when it's sent out, how far away the return was. It can see how strong it was and correlate that to what type of hydrometeorological target it might have been. And they also do Doppler processing. They're looking at the slight phase differences between adjacent pulses that return to see if the target's moving. A phased array can do that or the octopus will send out a chunk of rocks with 1 time delay, and it will send out a wave in 1 angle. We'll do the exact same thing and send out another chunk of rocks with a different time delay between them, and it will propagate at a different angle. He doesn't need to physically move where he is. He just needs to change where and when he's hitting the water to do that. An electronically scanned phased array can do that simply with phase shifters at every element. So it can look in one direction and then literally microseconds later look in another. Obviously, the military likes this. You need this in a modern warfare situation to look at what's coming from all the different directions. It's hard to do science with that though, because you typically don't have precise control over the polarization of the waves you're sending out. And that's where one of the challenges is coming. The evolution of the technology that I've looked at over the last decade or so has been not just using phase shifters to change the phase shift or time delay, depending on where you're living, but to simply digitize the waveforms going to and from every single element in a phased array. And there could be thousands of them. One the size of the 80AD would need, was it 8 to 10,000 or more elements? So 8 to 10,000 or more analog to digital and digital to analog converters with all the electronics that go into each one of those little things, all of the processing that goes into each one of those things, all the amplifiers and 2 polarizations. And then you need to get the waveforms as they come back, and you need to sum them and process them in a way that can electronically scan in all the different directions you care about. It's a huge amount of processing and a huge amount of electronics. And that's how the price goes way, way up, way fast compared to a traditionally mechanically scanned radar. The octopus has many, 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 many tentacles.
Many tentacles throwing many rocks, many directions. And I mean, what an amazing explanation, because I think at the heart of it, everyone can understand, yes, there is a lot of processing that needs to go on to make all of that work. And I think that'll be really interesting for people to see a little bit of the behind the scenes for some of the radar applications we'll talk about in a second, including storm chasing with radars in the field, and how much people assume you can do and what you can present and what the reality is. We'll get there. But that was a perfect explanation to set us up for that. Thank you. Jim, I saw your mic come down. Did you want to add something, or you were just, okay.
No, I keep flipping on and off. I don't know what I'm doing.
You're good. You're good. That's also a great show title nominee right there.
Show title.
Keep flipping off and I don't know what I'm doing. So David, I would love for you to tell us a little bit about, trying to storm chase with radars, and like just very generally what the kinds of radars are that you're taking out into the field. You mentioned the air. What all is going out? And sort of piggybacking on what we've heard, what technologies are you using to try to observe what kinds of things?
So one thing I'll mention just at a very basic level in terms of radar, the reason why we put a radar on the truck is in large part so we can get as close as possible. So that's and target events that are relatively rare. But one of the reasons why we do that is a radar beam spreads out the farther you go out in distance. So we want to try and get as much resolution as we can. We got to get as close as possible. The other thing, the Earth curves away, or the curved Earth. If you transmit a beam that's going straight, then you aren't going to be able to scan as low as possible. So for things like studying tornadoes, it's really important. So we take the radars out in the field to do a wide range of things. Most of my research is focused on tornadoes and supercells. We've taken out a phased array radar called the atmospheric imaging radar, which is a mobile radar. And the imaging technique works kind of like a digital camera. Like Jim said, it transmits a wide beam. So that's basically like the flash of energy that goes out. And then you receive your data with multiple antennas, which kind of act like the pixels of your camera. So you can figure out what the structure looks like of the storm in the same way that a camera would decompose essentially the image that's coming into it. So in this case, we're doing all of that in a vertical plane, then we kind of sweep back and forth, and we're able to basically get the entire structure of a storm in about 5 to 10 seconds. So we can get really fast observations of supercells, tornadoes, and you need that resolution, whether we're looking at a supercell tornado that's forming, or a QLCS mesovortex. All these things require us to have really high temporal resolution. And it's not just tornadoes, there's hailstorms, damaging winds, even the structure of a general thunderstorm. If you're really trying to understand it scientifically, like how the updraft's progressing, you can't just take a 5-minute volume scan and stitch it back together. It just becomes a very blurry image at that point. So you've got to be able to scan pretty quickly and get the whole storm from the top to the bottom to really understand it well scientifically. So that's one of the big goals of bringing this new technology out that can scan faster, can give us more information.
Fantastic. And we'll get a little bit more into the chasing experience here in a second, but I really quickly want to talk about radar development. And, both David and Caleb, you work in an integrated sort of interdisciplinary radar environment here. And I know, Jim, you have sort of something similar at MIT. And here at OU, we have something called the Radar Innovations Lab, the RIL. And it's a place where engineers and meteorologists can come to talk to one another and try to co-produce things that will be mutually beneficial on both sides of the aisle. It's so interesting how these groups can think of things differently. I know in my courses at Purdue, all my intro courses, I was with engineers. It's not like these areas of focus are that dissimilar from the physics and the math that you get on a basic level. But I think once you get into sort of trying to be focused on real world phenomenon and then having the radar technology being something you're focusing on, you start to get in divergent paths. So David, I'm hoping you can just tell us a little bit about the RIL and what goes on there, and how is it that you all come together to cultivate these ideas about what's needed in meteorology, and what can engineers bring to the table? How can you engage them?
So we really kind of prioritize having a lot of two-way discussions. There have been radar systems that have come from ideas from the engineers saying, here's a cool technology, what can we do with this for science? And then we've also had other discussions where the scientists have come up and said, we really need to solve this problem. And what technology, and then we ask the engineers, what technology is available that might help us get these types of measurements that maybe they're to make, to scan storms faster, or to get some new information out of, for example, we've looked, one of the recent concepts we came up with is develop a rapid scan cloud radar. Cloud radars generally, like NextRad, don't see cumulus clouds very well, but you can build very high frequency radars that will, but the ones that exist today take about 15 minutes to do a volume scan. So like a cumulus cloud, some of them don't even last that long. So we have a lot of these conversations going back and forth. Okay, what technology can we do to address to be able to scan clouds really fast? And we can develop a lot of back and forth conversations. So having all the people in the building who know the science, who know every component of the radar system that's going to go into it, we can come up with some pretty unique ideas and kind of solutions to both the science and engineering. So, and that goes also for the students who are involved in this. We have meteorology students, we have engineering students who are working together on these problems to try and develop kind of an interdisciplinary perspective and kind of build that problem solving into their careers as well.
I imagine that's really important for training good people into this area. And if you can get them focused on these applications and learning each other's languages early, then, much like children growing up in a bilingual household, you'll speak those languages together later, and you can be these really effective bridges. So it's really nice to know that there are environments where that's kind of being fostered. And that's probably part of this sort of research to operations conversation. You need to have those environments where these things are fostered. So that's really, really cool to hear about. I'm really excited. Again, we'll get to the juicy storm chasing stuff in a second. I want to come back to Jim for a moment and talk about the stuff you're doing with radars, because your applications are really broad spanning. You're trying to use radars to solve operational problems that are numerous. You're looking at things like floods, severe weather forecasting, warning performance, and even radar sighting. Tell us about what you're doing and what all is involved in getting that done. What are some of your cool projects that you're just really excited about at MIT?
Yeah, I think, from this conversation so far, we've talked about like the actual hardware design of like what type of radar do we need? And in order to answer that question, I mean, the Weather Service and other partners, the FAA, DHS, I think they still aren't entirely sure exactly what they need and why. And there's a big cattail on my screen there, Chad.
What title?
I'm 2 for 2 on those. So we need to figure out what kind of radar we need, what kind of network we need. And part of that is determining, for example, how fast an update time do we need, and how much data can a forecaster handle. Do we need 5-second updates of the whole storm like the imaging radar can do? Do we need more radars? Do we need gap filling radars? What frequency radars do we need? All those things have to be answered and frankly monetized. We need to make an argument to Congress that a new radar network someday, for example, would be beneficial to the nation. At the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do is save lives, but there's an aspect of this has to be worth it to the country. So some of the things we're doing, we're looking at the sales scans and the mesosales scans that the WSRADs do, which is the ability to insert between 1 and 3 scans of the base scan in the entire volume. And so this is a real kind of amazing example of R2O, Candice, of being able to have this idea of getting down rapid scans that the Rock came up with and some others, and getting it into operations. The problem is no one has analyzed it to say, is it working? Is it doing anything? And so we're looking at, is the warning performance for severe thunderstorms, hailstorms, windstorms, flash floods, is the warning performance getting statistically better when sales is used? And sure enough, we presented at the AMS and upcoming papers that as you use mesosales, even up to ×2 and ×3, it is resulting in better probability of detection, lower false alarm rates, and better lead times for tornadoes. It is producing better POD, FAR, and lead times for flash floods. And not only that, it is producing better QPE, quantitative precipitation estimation, because you're sampling the base scan more often. You're not assuming that it rained a given rate for 6 minutes. You're assuming it was raining that rate for 90 seconds. And then you get that better temporal kind of accuracy, and you add that up, you get more accuracy. So that's one thing, is the scan rate. But then there's, where do you put these radars, right? Where do we need more radars? And so one of the things we've been able to do that we've published on for radar network design is looking at a monetized benefit model for these different kind of radar network designs, based on population density, based on climatology, all these things, like where is it most beneficial to put new radars? And my colleague John Cho at Lincoln Lab has led a lot of this on the severe weather side, and we have identified certain regions of the country, and in fact northern Alabama is one of them. So this is a very hot topic for this show's audience, but also the western Carolinas, western North Carolina, and southeast Pennsylvania as 3 of the top most monetarily beneficial places to put gap filling radars, or in the future, a future network, more radars. So you combine that all together and you make this big picture argument of, we need a new network with these types of radars with this type of scanning, and you start to build that argument, and then you hand that off to the engineers like Caleb and the meteorologists like David, and you come up with that actual design and do it.
I'm so glad there's people out there so smart that can figure this stuff out, because I can tell you, I spent several hours this weekend just trying to figure out how to do a passive crossover on just a 2-way set of speakers for one signal. And it still doesn't work right. So I've got a couple of questions, and then some just totally random piece of information that showed up in my hard drive from an old briefing I got on a radar program. Caleb, this is from a study that you did in 2013 on the creeping wave effect. And I never fully understood it, but I thought the plot was super cool. But the thing that actually was the most interesting to me was that it was from an IEEE phased array conference.
Yes.
So this is like a big thing. apparently.
Oh, yeah.
This must have been the cylindrical radar, right, Caleb?
Yeah, so we've
CPAR?
got good stories about that. And that's a good segue into another discussion on how architectures and things play into the future of where weather radar might go. There is a phased array conference. There's also a radar conference for IEEE, both fairly reasonably well attended and a place to showcase and kind of tease upcoming technologies. But the creeping waves, the cylindrical radar we built, it was actually started to be built at OU when I was still at Purdue, and I didn't really know anything about it. I got there and it was being assembled, and it got assembled, and the patterns weren't looking good initially. And so to take a step back and look at the reason why you would build a cylindrical radar, the main problem as far as weather radar is concerned with a planar phased array is that when it scans away from broadside, or when it scans away from straight normal to the sheet, the beam starts to widen. That's one problem. It starts to widen, so you're getting different science when you're using a slightly different beam. It also becomes more difficult to control the polarization of the waves you're sending out, where the electric field is purely horizontal and purely vertical like you'd like it to be, using the right definition of horizontal and vertical for weather radar. It tends to skew with a planar array. A cylindrical array, if you imagine literally building, instead of a flat sheet, building a coffee can instead of a tissue box for face to cover 360. That was the idea behind CPAR. And there you could commute which sector of the can you're actually lighting up to change your azimuth angle, where you're pointing left and right. So it would give you the same polarization characteristics there and the same beam shape there. So you could electronically scan and have the nice benefit of doing the same measurement at every angle, which is great for science. The problem with this particular system was the elements were spaced just a little bit too far apart. With a phased array, you have to have the elements close enough together so that a simple phase shift is enough to scan the beam, and you get a beam that does not have replicas of itself all over the place. You make the elements too far apart, you don't just look in one direction, you start to look in other directions that are related to the main direction by some fairly simple math. On a cylinder, you don't get that effect because it's a cylinder, it's curved. Instead, that extra nasty beam you don't want is spread everywhere. So to get around spreading it everywhere, we had to do some fancy tricks to get rid of that. Coupled on top of all this were these creeping waves. These creeping waves were leading to some really bad problems in terms of how you could form nice beams, and we had to overcome that with some fancy calibration techniques. So those creeping waves, they sound nasty and they cause nasty problems, but they are predictable if you do some extremely nasty math. Some of the nastiest math I've ever seen in electrical engineering papers were from some people in the 80s looking at how to do phased arrays on cylinders. So yeah, nasty math.
If Caleb says it's nasty math, you cannot fathom the math. You cannot fathom it.
I'm sure we can. I just want to see like
Caleb is the smartest. Caleb is the best math person I've ever known.
No, these people were much smarter. When I was in the crib, they didn't have video games and they didn't have nice simulators where they could just throw a faster computer at it. They had to do the nasty. Nowadays, we have nice computers and we can beat the computers to death, and we found a way to do that for this thing, which eventually got it up and running. But overall, it does point to the idea of if you had a cylindrical phased array, it could replace a spinning dish, perhaps better than a bunch of flat sheets if you really cared about polarization and keeping the beam exactly the same at every angle, which you really want for science. That's harder to do with a flat sheet than it is with a cylinder. But you got to deal with creeping waves if you put the elements too far apart.
So this is Candice. I had a quick question. I'm really enjoying this conversation. It's taking me back to my operational days. I worked as a forecaster at WFO Des Moines, Iowa, and also Quad Cities, Iowa. And back then, so this might have been already addressed, but back then we had the colon of silence, where any type of, storm, weather phenomena that actually, went straight over the radar was actually lost for a period of time. So can you talk about how moving toward phase array radar and advancements in radar technology can address the cone of silence?
That's a really hard problem to solve, other than having other radars to provide coverage over the given radar that's got the cone of. So the basics, of course, is that the cone of silence is where you're not looking vertically. So you do that kind of around and up and around and up that I talked to, but at some point you go to some maximum angle, usually about 19, 20 degrees. And if you commutate that angle around, you make a cone, and that's where you can't see. The only way to avoid that is to scan higher. And unless you had some type of array that were curved upwards or something like that, you'd have to tilt quite a bit higher. The problem you run into, of course, is that when you're looking away from the radar and you have range gates, they are spaced nice and evenly. If you start looking more vertically, you're trying to think of how to explain this. You're basically looking in just one vertical point and summing it over a composite. So it doesn't actually, there's not really a good physical way to do it, unfortunately, other than more radars. So, more radars, all the radars, as many radars as possible, all the frequencies, all the powers, all the transmitter types, and we'll be good.
Well, that would certainly fix the radar gap coverage problem.
Yeah, we can solve both of those right there. It's more radars.
Let me jump real quick to just phased array in general. So for people listening, kind of at a really high level, explain how phased array operates, moving across elements, and sort of the mechanics behind it, or lack thereof, compared to sort of a conventional rotating radar.
Yeah, so I can answer that one. The traditional, typically called analog approach to it is the radar works at over a certain frequency range, let's say 3 gigahertz, which is typical. That's the high end of the 88Ds. So it's at 3 gigahertz, and every element will have a phase shifter in it. And that phase shifter's job is to take the sinusoidal waveform at the input, shift its phase, and produce something at the output. And it's going to shift its phase relative to a standard that is the same for every element. And every element shifts its phase in a way that's controlled using these phase shifters. That's the analog way of doing it. And these could be done with actual little delay lines. You see little squiggle delay lines that would add just enough of a wavelength to add that particular amount of phase shift, and you'd switch those in and out on the different elements. You could also use inductors and capacitors and other types of stuff to do it over a narrow bandwidth. With a digital phased array, you're actually changing the digital waveforms going to the analog to digital and digital to analog converters. And you're doing it that way, which has much more control, but takes more power in general and more complexity. The ultimate would be a true time delay instead of a phase shift. And the phase shift is, it's doing what a true time delay does, only over a fraction of the bandwidth. That only works over a small frequency range to do a phase shift instead of a time delay. So the acronym is typically TTD, or true time delay, to refer to something that does this over a wide enough bandwidth that you could send out an extremely wide bandwidth waveform that only goes in one particular direction instead of being spread out all over space.
So if you have these, at least I actually had the opportunity to visit the radar in Norman, I guess the one with the blue or whatever. At the time I was there, it only had one panel on it, I think. if you in theory have these panels facing in different directions, can you get around this problem of having to replace all the mechanical bearings and everything else in the actual machinery?
Yes, that's the idea. Ideally, it would be no moving parts.
Because one of the big challenges that the Weather Service they deal with is this service life extension program and having to replace the pedestals and all the moving parts.
Exactly.
The problem is if you have 4 radars, it's 4 times the cost up front. And we're talking 80,000 elements times 4 to get the spatial resolution you need. Not only that, something I don't think we've mentioned is as you scan off broadside, that beam widens. And so to get the true 1 degree resolution, you actually need an even bigger array than the dish we currently have. So I think a lot of us are under the impression that even though we would love to avoid a rotating array, it is the most sensible, I think, replacement that I think a lot of people are going kind of down that path, that we can do the flexible scanning, but also have the aspect of mechanical. So I don't think mechanical SLEPs are ever going to go away, but that's my opinion, unfortunately.
And one of the main disconnects between what's done for atmospheric science and what's done for DoD applications is the DoD is largely looking at point targets, or things that look like point targets compared to storms and clouds. And because of that, the requirements for their beams to be pure, such a perfect beam width with very low radiation anywhere but right at the spot in question. Keep that beam width to 1 degree or whatever it needs to be. The DoD doesn't care as much about that. They just want to make sure they can see the target. So they can have less control, less precise control over the radiation, allow the radiation pattern to not be as perfect because they care more about visiting everywhere more often with much more power to see if there's something there or not, instead of doing science with each one of the beams they're sending out.
So before we jump to I know Kim wants to talk about some chasing, and I'm interested to hear about that too, but I have one more question, and that's on precipitation type. What are sort of the capabilities of breaking that down with a phased array versus the traditional technology, and is there any hope of being able to sort of identify things like supercooled liquid and other things that the aviation community is interested in?
Yes, cooling is a huge factor in a lot of these. The solid state amplifiers that are driving these modern digital arrays are getting up 80-90% efficiency. In other words, they radiate 80 to 90% of the power that they consume, which is pretty good, but there's still an awful lot of heat.
I think Neil, you're talking about precipitation type cooling.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
I mean, cooling amplifiers is a whole nother problem.
Yeah, I'm thinking about.
I meant like say like liquid water in the -1 to -9 C range.
Yeah, that has a lot to do with polarization, which actually I think David is a real expert on. I mean, I do a lot of aviation related things, but with your cloud radars, David, I think you might have some good input on that.
Yeah, one of the biggest problems at S-band is in most of the supercooled water droplets that you see. I mean, in convective updrafts, you can often see them extending well above the freezing level with a signature that's called a ZDR column, where you see enhanced ZDR that extends sometimes several kilometers up within a convective updraft. But if you don't have strong convection, oftentimes the supercooled water droplets are present with ice that has a pretty similar signature, and it can get somewhat difficult to distinguish between the two in the radar gate. So you basically will need some additional information. It might be another wavelength, or in some cases you might be able to use the rapid scan radar to see how things are changing, to figure out, okay, things are changing in this manner. It might be because of the presence of super cold water. You might be able to use that kind of time rate of change measurement to figure that out. But it's a really challenging problem. I've seen a lot of multi-wavelength research where they not only use S-band or a longer wavelength, but they use something really short like a Ka band or a W band radar and pair them together to try and get after that kind of problem.
These are all really interesting applied challenges, and you're right, it spans beyond the National Weather Service into a lot of other communities that are using radar for their purposes like aviation. And so great questions. I know, Neil, you're sitting on a lot of really wonderful questions, and I'm sure others are too. And as they know from the sidebar, I am really excited to get to the chasing conversation, in part because it was not what I expected to hear, based on, I think, just the representations of chasing that you see when you're out chasing. You see these radar trucks and you just think, oh, that right there is the bastion of the best science. They have to be seeing just the coolest stuff in that truck right now. And Caleb did a really nice job earlier setting the stage for just how complex all the data is that you're taking in. David, I'd love to hear a little bit more about chasing from your view. You and Jim in particular, you guys had done about 10 years of chasing. My goodness. You've done about 10 years of chasing various kinds of things, severe weather, in many different aspects of severe weather, and even tropical weather, hurricanes. Tell us a little bit about what it's like to chase with a radar.
It's a pretty neat experience. Jim and I were both pretty blessed to have that opportunity during our PhD to be able to take an instrument out and basically lead a mini field campaign where we take a mobile radar out. So, I mean, each day we would come up with a forecast, decide, okay, is it worth driving from Norman, Oklahoma to Western Kansas? And when would we need to leave? And then decide, okay, we're going to take the radar out, continue forecasting on our way out there. But it's always full of surprises. So, I mean, it can be from the weather, it can be from the radar. The radar ones are definitely a lot harder to predict. Where you set up, you got a nice storm forming. It looks like rotation's about to intensify, maybe even get a tornado. Our final year, we had one case. We were in northern Kansas. We set the radar up and the pedestal wouldn't move at all. So we basically would look in one direction. So we basically just lined it up like a golf shot, aimed it at the tornado and tried to get some data. And even that didn't work.
Didn't you take a picture down below the array pointed at the tornado?
We have a picture of it. Basically, the tornado
texted it to me,
and you're framed by the array of the antenna, and you can see the tornado through the center of the antenna. So
it'd be a great cover of a journal article,
So I mean, you get cases where you get beautiful data though, and those are some of the most rewarding, where everything comes together, where you made a good forecast. And a lot of times there's some luck involved to it too. I mean, it's not tornadoes, supercells, or have an element of randomness certainly to them, where not every storm in a given environment is going to do the same thing. So you got to get a little bit lucky sometimes, but if you make a good forecast, more often than not, you'll be roughly in the right spot to where you can hopefully get some really good data. And once you're on the storm, I mean, the biggest thing we always prioritized was our safety. I mean, that was number one, first and foremost. You have a very expensive vehicle for one thing, with a lot of university symbols on it. So that's also very important. It gives you kind of a very high sense of responsibility, especially in the area of Twitter, where everything, is on video. But you also are trying to make decisions in real time about the storm. You're trying to get the radar up and running. There's a lot of things going on to try and get this data set, keep the crew safe, but also, hopefully squeeze in some time to, take a few photos too, and really kind of enjoy the moment. So it's a really neat experience being out there in the field, and then also coming back and seeing the data. So with some of the radars, like the atmospheric imaging radar, we did not have a real-time display. So that made things a little bit tough, especially kind of in the pre-sales era, where you get like 5-minute updates and like, oh, the storm's getting a little too close, so now we got to reposition and go south. Whereas, with sales, you could actually track, the position of the couplet better, to where, okay, might feel a little safer in that spot. But we collect a lot of data on rain-wrapped tornadoes that we couldn't see very well, that, were clearly not coming toward us. But having that real-time information is really helpful. And that's become something that's a very high priority for our future radar systems. Another radar that we operate is a rapid scan dual pole radar called RAXPOL. And this radar rotates 180 degrees per second. So it just kind of does the brute force way of scanning fast. It just rotates really quickly. And it does so by changing the frequency. It transmits 2 pulses, then it changes its frequency, transmits another pair, and it kind of does what we call frequency hopping. It just jumps from pulse across a sequence of different frequencies. And that gives you different information when you go to different frequencies. So you don't need as many radar pulses. So you can scan super quickly. But it's not nearly as elegant as a phased array that's moving this beam around electronically. Gives you a ton of flexibility, whereas you still have this dish that's moving around. But that's another radar system we've used. And it's a radar I took to Hurricane Irene in 2011, which is really cool. Hurricane deployments are they're pretty grueling, but they're pretty cool. We had like mini supercells that were passing nearby the truck. They were out there for almost 24 hours collecting data. We were at a runway of an airport on the south side of North Carolina, and collecting data on the rain bands coming in and many supercells. I remember taking like a 1-hour nap because we'd driven all the way out there from Oklahoma to North Carolina in the span of 36 hours, and we're all exhausted. And then I woke up and we're getting close to the eye, and then we got to be in the eye wall too, which is really neat. So they're getting to be in the eye where it's almost dead calm is kind of an eerie experience. Like, is it over? Because it almost feels like it, but of course it's not. Then you get the backside of it, and so there's a lot of really neat places you take mobile radars and taking. The nice thing too is it's not just weather around the United States; it can be deployed all around the world. Taking these systems to do science in many different places. So that's one of the main advantages of having all these different radar systems that can be taken. We've taken some of our mobile radars to Peru and South Korea to look at precipitation, primarily in mountains. So not just storm chasing, but we can do a lot of cool different things. But storm chasing is my favorite part of it because that's.
Yeah. I mean, we kind of geek out about that, I think, naturally here. But tell us a little bit about inside, the radar truck, because you kind of mentioned for some of the radar, you're not getting what we all saw in Twister, where they just have this, NextRad real-time display or whatever the phrase of gobbledygook words were, and they put up these little, can sensors into a tornado and just get boop, 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 here's everything, just reams and reams of numbers and real time imaging for you to even use to make the judgment calls you're trying to make. All of that, is that remotely what it's like in there? You kind of hinted at maybe no, and sometimes things break and it seems really, really high tech. Is it sometimes kind of more low tech than we'd expect and a little bit challenging?
Yeah, certainly on the display end. So especially with some of these prototype systems like the atmospheric imaging radar, where we were really kind of at the cusp of trying to figure out what do we do with all this data? How do we handle it in real time? And it was at that point, it really wasn't something we had a great handle on. In part, it's kind of driven by your budget constraints. You want to build a radar system, get good data first of all. But like polishing off that real-time display, making it really pretty, is kind of the thing that comes last on the checklist. And that was something with that system we never really got to. But with some of our new radars, it is a little bit more push button, and there's some really nice displays like with the RAXPOL, where basically you could turn on that radar and click a button and it will start spinning and collecting data more or less. And it will put out a kind of a pretty real-time display going around plotting, a nice PPI image of, the thunderstorm that's nearby. You can change the radar variables. But with all these systems, if you see a bunch of numbers scrolling down on your computer screen, it's probably because there's something that's gone wildly wrong with your computer and not you're collecting some amazing data.
And that's when the tornado happens.
Yeah, and that's exactly when the
Every
tornado
time.
will happen. Yeah.
Every time.
So it really makes you those data sets that you do get are really kind of prized for that reason, because there's a lot of things that have to go right, because tornadoes don't just happen everywhere all the time, right? So you've got to get in the right spot to collect data in the first place.
Then you want to back up the data before something goes wrong on one of the racks in the trucks.
Yeah, and you think about a radar too, that's, you know, in one place all the time, you know, compared to what we're driving on. It's a radar mounted on a truck going down all kinds of different roads that have all kinds of potholes and are poorly maintained. You know, the electronics and cables and are just, yeah, Bob's road. It's basically just, it is getting constantly shuffled around to where, you know, almost anything can kind of go wrong with those systems. But I mean, more often than not, though, you're able to go out and collect data when you take the system out. But it's kind of improvising and correcting those problems on the fly as best you can that really can get you from, you know, 60, 70% to hopefully, you know, 80, 90%.
So we have a couple of cases where we've been able to use, or mobile radar was used for tornado ratings.
Mhm.
There's a lot of debate on that, and I know that in the current EF scale they do not incorporate that. But what do you see in the future? Do you think that we'll be able to get to a point where we could use mobile radar more for rating tornadoes? Obviously, we can't have them out on every tornado, but to be able to incorporate the data.
I mean, I think it would certainly give you a better idea of what the winds truly are in the tornado. You know, even for the EF scale winds, where you're trying to get 10 meters above ground level and a 3-second measurement, it's almost impossible to even get that from a mobile radar, because you have to be so close to the tornado to make that measurement. There's some ways of trying to calibrate that down from, if you're looking at 100 meters above the ground, to try and figure out what it is at 10. But it becomes pretty difficult even with that. But I think there are some opportunities to at least get an idea of how good the EF scale is. The problem is it's going to be hard to get enough mobile radar measurements to categorize all of the tornadoes that are happening. So what do you do if you have, say, 20 a year where you have mobile radar data, but then you have 1,000 other tornadoes that you don't? So I'm not sure how you go about evening out that distribution, but it definitely gives you an idea of if the EF scale is trying to measure wind speed, it's kind of a scary problem. You know, as a damage indicator, it's fine for that. But if you're trying to actually use that to figure out what is the distribution of wind speeds across the United States and tornadoes, it's going to be a pretty biased measure, biased toward the low end for sure.
Caleb, you teased us with a mention of talking about the future of radars and chasing. So fill us in.
I think one of the things we've done in the last couple of years looked at using multi-statics. So when a radar lights up raindrops, the return doesn't just go back to the radar. When it lights up the raindrop, it induces currents on the raindrops, and which re-radiates the radar's waveform just about everywhere. And if you have receivers just about everywhere, anywhere, they will see those returns as well. And if you can correlate those returns with what is going on with what the radar sent out, you can actually see weather from a multi-static sense in a pretty neat way. And those receivers are not that expensive and not too difficult to build. We had them sitting at a middle school locally and saw multi-static returns from a tornado. And you can clearly see there's a tornado there. And that processing is not quite real time, but it could be with more development. Those are the kind of thing being that the receive side of these things is not terribly difficult to build if you don't care about making a very narrow resolution. You could see something like a tornadic debris signature with these things, and that's what we're hoping to demonstrate in the coming years.
Yeah, one thing I'll follow up on with Caleb. So the bistatic, multistatic radars that we've developed pair with NexRad. So traditionally, you had to modify the transmitter to do these, but we figured out a way, basically on the receive side, that you can more or less figure out when that signal's coming, because you have to be able to synchronize the transmitter and receiver. So we figured out a way to do that on the receiver side, so you don't have to make any modifications on the transmitter. So what that lets you do is you can figure you should be able to eventually get a 3-dimensional wind vector. So you can see So let's say, for example, with the radar, you only see the wind coming toward or from you, right? With a typical NEXRAD. So if there's a big squall line with strong winds coming from west to east, north of the radar, you're not going to see those strong winds. But with a system like this, if you put the receivers out there, you could see those. And as you start to see more and more areas, or as you start to populate those out, you might see the intricate details within a supercell that might clue you into the structure of a storm that's going to produce a tornado, and that's not.
Well, it could be neighborhood level warnings beyond where they are now, or for severe weather.
So I've got two questions. One is just from someone who's never actually seen one of these mobile radars in action for long periods of time. I've only had the great fortune of seeing them parked in different places. How do you actually power this thing? Is this like a gas generator, or I mean, it's consuming a ton of wattage. What do you run it with?
Yeah, it's a diesel fuel generator on the back, which was another point of failure we had with one of our mobile radars. It would just start up and stop running, and that was definitely a point of frustration for a while. But usually it's just a diesel fuel generator on the back.
You'd be surprised though. We're not sending a megawatt of power with these radars. This is depending on the radar. We're talking in some cases hundreds of watts. In cases like Raxpol used to be before it switched was, I want to say 20 kilowatts or so, compared to 750 kilowatts with the 88D. But keep in mind that's peak power, and you're only sending that, about 1/1000th of the amount of time that you're actually transmitting. It's a very, very small, or 1/1,000,000th. I don't know. It's been a while since I worked with the mobile radars. I forget which PRTs they're using.
Do you ever have people like when you just pull up at like your local truck gas station and you're filling up your radar? Do they ask questions?
So I got a good anecdote for that. So in 2012, it was our first year out, and we were scanning our first tornado, and it was a joyous celebration. We were just, a bunch of friends had pulled up, and we were all, if we had champagne, we'd be having champagne if not driving. But this car pulled up, and I was next to the road. And this woman with a very Southern accent said, "Does that thing have the Doppler?" And I said, "Well, of course it has the Doppler. It's a radar." And the problem was, we went back home and processed the data, and we did not have usable Doppler data. And in fact, the Doppler data was basically just noise. And in 2013, we scanned multiple strong tornadoes and continued to just get noise for the Doppler data. And it wasn't until 2014 that we finally figured out why this was happening. It hit me. I think it was probably 3 a.m, and I finally realized what we had been doing wrong with this radar for years. And it was just funny that I always think back, we finally got good data in 2014 and 2015, but I always think of that. Does that thing have the Doppler? And we said, of course it does. And it didn't. And that is just a great anecdote for these research radars.
That's amazing. I mean, years. You take this thing out, and oops. Can you tell us about? I mean, you said it dawned on you what the error was. Was it a sophisticated error, or was it the kind of error that we encounter in coding all the time, where you just miss a semicolon somewhere?
Somewhere in the middle. What you have to do. That's funny. Semicolon. So what you have to do is you have to select your pulse repetition frequency, which is basically how often you send a pulse. And you have this trade-off between velocity aliasing and range aliasing. It's called the Doppler dilemma. What we were trying to do was get fancy and do what's called a staggered PRT, which is something that the NEXRADs do. And you combine 2 different PRTs that alternate to try to get a better Doppler velocity folding point while maintaining your range folding point. The problem was, given the trying not to get too technical here, given the duty cycle, which is how often we could pulse and how long the pulse was using pulse compression and all these things put together, it was basically my dissertation in the sense that I found out, based on all these fancy waveforms we were trying to do with this thing, our pulses were too close together. And when you looked at the velocities in the spectrum, it was just a flat line.
Yeah.
We didn't have a wide enough spectrum for a wide spectrum within a tornado. And even though you theoretically would have a folding velocity of 40 meters per second, if you don't have a good measurement in either of the two PRTs, it's garbage. So immediately we went to single PRT with a 25 meter per second aliasing, and we got beautiful data. And I'll never forget 2015, we got the Tipton tornado in May 2015. It was the spring I was going to write my dissertation and graduate in the fall, and we had never gotten a tornado. And you have no real-time display. You have nothing. You don't know if you collected the data. We couldn't even see it because it was rain wrapped. We drive all the way home. We offload the data all night because it's terabytes of data for 36 different channels of raw IQ data. Hit go, I'm up till 4 a.m, hit go for the processing in MATLAB, go home, sleep for 3 hours, come back, see the first image and literally cry, because this is what we've been trying to do for 6 years. And hey, I can graduate. So it did eventually work.
It did eventually work. I mean, what's so striking to me out of your story is, and I'm going to distill this down as only someone who's completely not an expert in your area can, but it seems to me that you guys were trying to do a lot of very fancy things with a lot of we'll go to, maybe some Caleb kind of descriptors here, the nasty math and the very neat technologies and everything else. And it might be that if you're taking that out on the road and you don't have your arms wrapped around it all quite yet, you can put yourself at some risk of overshooting and not know what you're getting and not understand what you're even looking at. And is that kind of what it feels like to work in radar sometimes, where you have this great technology idea and you're putting it out there and you're just spending a lot of time trying to figure out what you're even looking at? Because that's kind of been my impression of what's gone on with the dual pole radar network that we've installed, and that a lot of the research that's been going on has been to try to figure out, well, how do we interpret what we're looking at and bring that into an applied space? Do you feel like that kind of is what it's like just to work in this radar meteorology intersection sometimes? I saw a lot of nods. And, I see you're all sort of in agreement with it. Jim, if you want to comment, and I know Caleb was giving some good nods there too. What are your feelings on that?
You want to go, Caleb?
I hand built what I did for my dissertation, which is not meant for weather at all. It was for the Army, but hand built just a 16 element digital array demonstrator, soldering a couple thousand components by hand. And just the feeling of getting all 16 channels up and running, seeing all the bits and all the data coming off, and knowing that just one component being wrong means it doesn't work anymore. One thing goes wrong in the power supply. I caught it on fire once. There was an inductor that came off and it stopped. The loop back in one of the power things was messed up and it caught itself on fire, but I stopped it. These things are insanely complicated. These modern digital arrays are, and software can help prevent a lot of that. But then the software gets insanely complicated. You start seeing the price tags that these DoD systems end up being, hundreds of millions. You understand why on a lot of these systems. Incredibly complicated, and it doesn't take much for something to go wrong. You don't take things for granted after you've had some experiences where little things, little silly things lead to failures.
Especially when you might see one tornado a year. And that's the time where a cable is unplugged, or the generator doesn't start, or I mean, just one quick. We didn't have that display. All we could see was 36 channels of lines. And if you saw those lines squiggling around and the lights blinking on the computer, you just prayed. You said, I hope it's writing data, and I hope it's good data. And you might get back and you process that data, you realize you missed 12 of the 32 channels and your data is useless. It's very hard to spend all that time on it and have it not work out.
Yeah, these systems have electronics in them that are not that dissimilar from cell phones, but they have not gone, they haven't gone through production and testing, and there aren't millions, not hundreds of millions of them out there using the same chipsets. They're very, 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 most of them are one-of-a-kind systems that we play with. So it's different than just dropping your cell phone.
All right. So listen, guys, I'm your lowly practitioner here. So when is phased array going to go operational? Am I going to be at Shadow Lawn Cemetery, or what's the situation here?
It was in the 60s.
In terms of for the Weather Service, I mean, there's been a number of kind of false starts, I guess you could almost say, of the Empire program, the sensor program, these things that were in collaboration with other entities like the FAA, DHS, DoD. I do know, and Neil might be able to chime in here, but the Weather Service would really like to, the latest I've heard is to make a decision on an architecture in this decade. And so in terms of where we're getting, I mean, this isn't hearsay, but I think we're looking at an operational network of phased arrays. We still may be 20 years away. It's the process. We don't even know which architecture we're going to go with yet. We're not fully set on that. And that's, we need to build prototypes. We need to spec out the network. It's taking a long time. And at the same time, we've got things like sales that are giving us a lot of good benefits right now to kind of hold us over. We have the dual pole upgrade. And one of the biggest things we didn't talk about is just doing accurate dual polarimetry on a phased array is something we're really, really struggling with. It's arguably the hardest thing to do. So there's just a lot of questions left.
Troy will be in the cemetery. That's
I was just going to say, in my entire time at NOAA, I don't think it was anyone's was questioning the need. It was the different agencies and the different departments with the different requirements and trying to figure out where the requirements overlapped. And I mean, if people out there in the meteorology community remember INPOS, I'm worried it's going to end up like that. This is tough. It's not about the technology though. That's the weird thing. The technology is actually way ahead of where they're settling on requirements there.
So since we're about 100 years away from phased array, my next question is, what do we do about the what do we do about these radar gaps? And we've done shows on this, and I've got a big one in my backyard here. I mean, a massive one, where we had a WSR 57 in Meridian, Mississippi that went away, and now you've got an 88D in Birmingham and 88D in Jackson. So your radar beam through parts of West Alabama and East Mississippi, it's maybe 12,000 feet off the ground, and that beam is about as wide as a 2x4. So is there anything we can do about that in the short term, or we just have to do the best we can with what we got?
So on the gap analysis stuff, there are clear areas and clear arguments, including your area being in the top 3. There are other areas. We did this analysis of possible improvement factor, which was combining all these different types of monetary benefits and where would you get the best bang for your buck. So I've heard that there are some newer radars. There's the one Langley up in the Northwest is relatively new, and that one's unique in that it points all the way down to, I think, minus 0.2 degrees now, or maybe even a little less because it's up on a hill. But my impression was that was a congressional, really, really pushing hard to get that radar there. There are, universities that are getting radars. University of Louisiana Monroe is their radar is being fed to the National Weather Service now, which is really interesting. But we have the gaps identified. We need to make the monetary argument that lives will be saved and property will be protected, and the data is there. We just need to find the way to argue it properly.
Yeah, it is sorry, James, go ahead. Very frustrating. I was going to say it's very frustrating, and I do believe that lives are at risk and in jeopardy in parts of rural sections of East Mississippi and West Alabama, and I'll just leave it at that. Man, goodness, we need one in Meridian, so I'll leave it at that. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, Caleb, I wanted to ask you a non-weather related question because I was very moved by reading your story. 2 years ago, nearly, you were involved in an accident. You wouldn't have even been here tonight. Are you comfortable talking about that for a second? Because I found that to be a really moving thing.
Yes. Yes, I am. I was actually on my way to give an update to NOAA on research we were doing using UAVs to help with polarimetric calibration of phaser base. And a truck pulled out in front of me while I was on a motorcycle. And I had maybe a 2% chance, is what they were saying when my wife talked to him after everything was said and done. 124 units of blood, many broken bones, life saved by wearing a helmet, and good people who came immediately. Good service, or good emergency service people. So I'm lucky to be here.
Well, when I think about how we could have lost one of the most important people in our field, it really was moving to me. Can't take anything for granted. And I appreciate you sharing that. It really was a very moving story to me, Kay.
Helmets save lives.
All right, Mr. Span, you can take it away, sir.
All right, so what we're going to do here is take a quick break, and we're going to bring in Tony Rice and his astronomy report. We're going to have Jen's This Week in Tornado History. We're going to come back with the weather roundup, picks of the week, and much more as WeatherBrains rolls along.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your astronomy outlook.
Full moons have a lot of names, and they're usually aligned with agricultural events, many coming from indigenous people of the United States and Canada. But the harvest moon earns a special place. You may have noticed the moon a little more over the past couple of days, and that's going to continue for a few more days. It's pretty typical of the harvest moon, or the full moon closest to the autumnal equinox in the northern hemisphere, which rises tonight right around sunset. The moon always rises near sunset on the day that it reaches full phase, shines brightly all night, and sets around sunrise the following morning. On average, in the mid-latitudes, the full moon rises about 50 minutes later each day following the full moon. But that's an average. The harvest moon is special because it occurs so close to the equinox. That means that in the mid-latitudes, it rises only about 20 to 25 minutes later. Thanks to that bright full moon, for nearly a full week, there really isn't a period of time where there isn't light in the sky. Enough light to finish up tasks like, say, harvesting crops. This year's harvest moon is even more special. The full moon hasn't occurred this close to the equinox since 1980, when they were separated by just 39 hours. And this won't be bested until 2028, when the full moon and September equinox will be separated by just over an hour. All that variation happens because the time it takes the moon to make the trip around the Earth and the time it takes the Earth to make the trip around the sun, and they don't line up all that well, but that's for another time. The moon also might look a little bigger around this time of year, especially around moonrise. This is because, not unlike the sun, the moon's path through the sky is lower this time of year. That keeps it closer to the horizon a little bit longer. But I assure you, it's the same size at moonrise as it is later in the evening. You're experiencing the moon illusion, a trick our brains play on us that scientists continue to debate the cause of. Know those objects along the horizon, giving your brain something to compare to, aren't the complete explanation. You see, astronauts in space with no foreground objects in their field of view, they experience the moon illusion too. That's your astronomy outlook. Follow me at RTP Hookie for more spacey stuff like this.
This week in tornado history, September 20th, 2000, an F4 tornado hits Xenia, Ohio. This tornado developed on a golf course approximately 2 miles southwest of the Greene County Airport. There were cyclonic swirls in corn and bean fields, and initially numerous snapped and twisted trees. The tornado raced off to the northeast toward the town of Xenia at 65 miles per hour. Along the total 9-mile path, there were approximately 250 homes damaged or destroyed. Cars were thrown from the Highway 35 bypass into ditches, and 4 semis were thrown up to 400 yards near the fairgrounds. Over 40 businesses were damaged or destroyed, including the local Walmarts, the Kroger, and tire discounters. 6 churches were damaged. There was one fatality from this tornado, Mr. James Mullins Jr. For the Dayton Daily News, Mr. Mullins was retired from General Motors. He was at home with his wife when the tornado struck. He was killed and she was seriously injured. This was the second time in 26 years that the town of Xenia was hit by a major tornado, and some of the same areas struck by the 1974 F5 were hit once again by this F4. We have more details about this event and hundreds more at tornadotalk.com.
I had no earthly idea, Jen, that Xenia was hit again. I somehow missed this in 2000. Wow, that's fascinating. I think everybody that's old enough, or at least from my generation, they know about 1974 and the super outbreak, but that's a great story. But Jen, plug your site again. It's what you guys are doing. It's just tremendous.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, tornadotalk.com. And we have over 500 tornado summaries. We're currently working on a new summary per month on a brand new event. And then we're going back and revamping some of the old summaries. We do have a membership tier as well for some of the, a lot of the super outbreak stuff we did. You can join our membership and read some premium summaries, but we're having a great time and enjoying the writing. And we're started a new blog. We're doing it on this day in history. We're covering tornadoes, other weather. There is other weather other than tornadoes, and other history. So we've been tackling some of that. We have that on our homepage, and it's free for everybody to read. Some people have told me it's their new newspaper. They get on there and read that first thing in the morning. So we're getting people hooked on history, and especially tornado history, which is a lot of fun.
Very cool. So let's do a quick weather roundup. I think we should make Neil our new tropical expert, since he's the new guy on the show.
Yeah.
Neil, we got 2 tropical storms on the board. Pete Rose. That's all. That's all I'm seeing of the memes.
I've been paying attention to those. They look like they're going to be some decent swell generators, but they look like they're both going to recurve and stay out in the ocean. So it doesn't look like a threat, but keep your eyes on the models anyway. You never know.
And it looks like Invest 98, the new wave coming off the African continent, is going to be a kind of a recurving storm too, with this big trough that's bringing the cool air, kind of turning these things out to sea. So, but again, caution, we have a long way to go in the hurricane season. We're just about halfway there. So Neil, what's the weather like down in your neck of the woods? What you got?
Well, I'm up in DC right now. It's not as warm as it has been, but I was in North Carolina all the week before, and it was hot and dry, and the grass is unhappy. But yeah, it's time for summer to come to an end.
So this all of our associates in Norman here, I guess the cooler air will kind of be blowing through there first. When does it come through? The cold front come through there? Kim, is this tomorrow?
Man, I think we had the frontal passage at the start of the show, but I think we're getting the cooler air that will continue streaming and dropping our temperatures overnight. So pretty exciting. Actually, it was a really pretty front to see on radar. And if you look at radar now, you can continue to observe it. There is a really crisp boundary, and it's not because there's any precip. Trust me, we would love that to happen, because we're also dry. Our grass is also unhappy. But you can see the front on radar because of all of the migrating butterflies going south through the plains right now. So very, very pretty, very cool. But yeah, we're going to be just wonderfully enjoying this taste of fall for about 72 hours before we come right back to the fiery hellscape that has been
Show
defined the last
title.
month or so.
So Troy, are you going to have any relief in Austin? Looks like you're going to get a little bit of relief there, huh?
Yeah, we do. I mean, it was actually quite comfortable today. We were only 102. We Camp Mabry got up to 102 out at Bergstrom. It was 99 today. The front through here, early afternoon tomorrow, depending on what you're looking at, and the high resolution model guidance would suggest that, yes, as you would expect, the showers develop just southeast of Austin and then move south from there, but at least a little bit cooler. 80s for highs, upper and mid 50s for lows once we get into the latter part of the week. So looking pretty good.
Jen, how low will you go?
Probably mid 40s.
Ooh.
Highs low 60s Wednesday, Thursday. So about a 20-degree drop in our temperatures. So it'll be a little nippy, but I'm fine with that. I think I can officially put the portable AC away, and we get back into the 70s for the weekend. But yeah, it's going to feel much more like autumn here finally.
Now down here, Bill Murray, looks like we could do some 40s easily Thursday and Friday morning.
Yeah, James. I think Saturday's my definition of a perfect weather day in Alabama. 52 for the morning low, 78 for the afternoon high. Couldn't be better. And our grass is extremely happy because all it's done is rain here for the past several weeks. We got another 2.5 inches on Saturday.
Bill, you're taking our rain. I am concerned tomorrow with the lower humidities in the afternoon into tomorrow night and into Wednesday. We may have wildfire danger here in South Central Texas. It's being discussed now because for all the rain we saw until August around here, it is really dried out now. We've had a little in the way of precipitation over the last 30 days. So a little concerned with the wildfire danger in Texas beginning late tomorrow into Wednesday.
Hey, let me chase a rabbit here real quick. Kim had mentioned the butterflies on the front. Let me throw out for our radar experts here, roost rings. Are those all purple martins that we're seeing with the roost rings on radar, or are there other birds involved?
There are, I think a lot of them are purple martins. There's a couple of people, Phil Stepanian and Kyle Horton, who've been looking at different roost rings as well, especially in Texas, from a lot of different species of bats. Yeah, there's, but purple martins, the most common, I believe.
Yeah, Troy's got the bats out there. When do you see those bats on radar, Troy?
Every night at sunset. Just amazing. It truly is to sit there and watch that. And I remember when they commissioned the New Braunfels radar in the 1990s, the first night, it was a summer night, and we saw that developing. And, I'm about to have a fit. I don't know what that is. And the first night back in the 90s, and radar, the bat signature, something you see all the time down here. Really pretty amazing.
And one more quick question while we're chasing this rabbit. In the eye of a hurricane, what's the best dual polarization product to use to try and find birds trapped in the eye of a hurricane?
This show's going to the birds.
Probably
Exactly.
either the differential reflectivity, because birds will give you a really high value of that, because they tend to be produce more horizontal return than a vertical return, but they'll also probably be pretty low correlation coefficient too.
I was going to say row HV.
Yeah, awesome.
Row HV will actually go negative.
All right, Bill Murray, I got to go do Studio A, so I'm going to let you do the picks of the week here. And by the way, we'll do double email next week. We got a lot of emails, but Aubrey had to jump off, so we'll do a double email segment next week. So, Bill, you take it for picks of the week.
All right, I assume that Dr. Cloco McLean warned you guys that we'd need a pick of the week from you to get out of this thing tonight, or we can just have to go on the rest of the evening. So that gives you a little time. I'll stall for you as long as I can, and I'll go to Troy Kimball. Troy, you have to give us a pick of the week, and you have to give us your nominee for show title, because there's really been a plethora of them tonight.
Yeah, decided to go with something that Jim mentioned a couple of minutes ago. If you're not familiar with it, and remember what I always say, about 50% of the stuff on the internet is crap. But I went and found, if you're interested in radar, go look at the Langley Hill Doppler weather radar. There's a little Wikipedia article that looks pretty legitimate, and it quotes Dr. Cliff Mass up at University of Washington. It's a real interesting radar because on the Olympic Peninsula, from someone that hangs out there occasionally, it was blind. So the Seattle radar was not getting over the Olympics, and you had no signal really. And I've been out there before when it was hailing on the Olympic Peninsula, and you did not see anything on radar. I mean, it was low top convection coming off the Pacific. But it's really interesting that Langley Hill was actually a radar, if I'm not mistaken, that was surplus from the Mississippi coast. And it was a political thing. I think Jim mentioned that it was very much political to get that Olympic Peninsula covered. And so my pick of the week is that real brief, but appears to be accurate Wikipedia article on the Langley Hill Doppler weather radar.
Outstanding, Troy. And can you give us your nominee for the show title for tonight from all the many choices we have?
I have no idea, but I do like the nasty math. I've got to go with Caleb. The nasty math, that one I'm going to use in class. So I'm going to borrow that one if you don't mind, Caleb.
Yeah, I think that's a great one, Troy.
Green's functions. Yeah, it's just Green's functions over cylindrical grounded dielectric slab.
Yeah, and if you had trouble with fractions in school, you won't like that, will you, Jim? So that's for sure. All right, thank you, Troy. I will hope for the best on the fire danger there. And
thanks.
South Texas. Hope that doesn't come true, because this next thing you'll have locusts or something else coming through there.
No, I'm not even moved back into this place yet. Give me a chance to get past the winter storm. So, yeah.
Jen Airmore, I wanted to congratulate you on a great recording tonight for your piece. That really is interesting, and that's not the only two, right? Xenia's been hit 5 times by tornadoes. Is that correct?
Yeah, and not that long ago, a couple of years ago, they were hit. So yeah, they are the more of Ohio, I guess. It's awful that they've had so much tragedy there. There's a little corridor there, west central Ohio, that seems to get hit quite a bit. Another contender is Van Wert. They get hit quite a bit in that area and up into that kind of Paulding County, up in that corridor of Ohio as well. So thank you for that.
Jennifer, the Van Wert thing was where that theater was up there a few years ago, where so many people took shelter in the basement, right? And so many lives were saved.
Yeah, the employee there took everybody into the bathrooms and made sure that everybody was, because the cars were being thrown into the theater and there were kids there, but they got them all to safety. So yeah. So
that was on the day of the Veterans Day outbreak, wasn't it?
That's right. Yep.
Yep. November 11th, 2002.
You got it. Yep.
Go ahead, Jen.
So I got an email earlier today that became my pick of the week because I threw it on Twitter, but I do weather in Casper, Wyoming. And so the program director wrote, and he's like, look at these photos, and they're cold air funnels. I love cold air funnels. I think they're just cool. So I asked him, I said, can I use this photo and put it on Twitter? And he's like, he texted me back. He said, yeah. He goes, I'm up on the roof taking photos. And I'm thinking, I'm going to be on the roof. I'm just thinking, but no, it was a great shot you're looking downtown Casper and looking out toward Casper Mountain. So it's just a cool little wispy cold air funnel to make everybody smile. So that's my pick.
And that's outstanding. And we're going to be talking on, I think it's November 8th with the author of the book, God and the Tornado, and the documentary, Tornado God. And he talks about Xenia in there. Xenia was known to the Native Americans, Jen, as a place where tornadoes frequented. And I had never heard that. So we'll have to ask the author.
That'll be interesting.
Because he said that the Native Americans actually had a name for Xenia that they probably wouldn't have built the town there if they had paid attention to that. So,
okay.
So that'll be a really interesting thing. Dr. Kim Poco McLean, thank you for the most outstanding poundage of WeatherBrains we've ever had on one show tonight. Outstanding show. We could have gone on all night, but I bet you got a great pick of the week for us.
I do, and it's motivated by the theme of radar and also the butterflies coming through. And I thought that people might be interested in learning a little bit more about aeroecology. It's this really neat intersection of meteorology and ecology, where we are able to use radar to do things like track migratory species. And there was a book chapter released by Dr. Phil Chilson, a researcher, professor of meteorology here, I believe, also, who works very actively in this intersection, and will be just, I think, fun reading for people who like talking about the bats, the birds, and the bees.
And I know you've got to have a nominee for the show title from the mini Pics of tonight, Kim.
Oh my goodness, where to even start? I'll have to go back through our chat and select a favorite, but my goodness.
Yeah, I liked Less Elegant Than Bats. I think that one slipped by unnoticed pretty much there from the discussion, but I thought that was an outstanding one. And they're too numerous to mention. JP will have a hard time figuring this out tonight.
Yes.
But
I had a timely relevant quip that came to my mind earlier this week. It's that
yeah, hit us, Caleb.
OU is moving to the SEC because of climate change.
We'll remember that in a couple of years. That's outstanding.
I thought it was funny.
Yes, it was. As an SEC guy, that is pretty funny. Dr. Neil Jacobs, we're so thankful to have you on board. Not evidenced by my forgetfulness tonight. I almost let you standing on the dock there somehow. But anyway, we're so glad you're with us. Thank you for all the outstanding questions tonight. We're really looking forward to your insight on the show.
Oh, this was a lot of fun. So let's see. So my pick of the week is the AMS Summer Community Meeting. Lots of interesting talks on tap, weather enterprise, public-private partnerships, data sharing, all sorts of cool stuff. All virtual, so sign up and join in.
That's outstanding. So you're back in DC this week?
I am, but I'm going to be giving a talk on there, but I could be anywhere on the planet with an internet connection for that matter. I may change my backdrop just so they think that.
Well, again, we're really glad you're with us, and thank you for all your input tonight. All right, so I'll start working around our great panelists here tonight. Jim, you got a pick of the week for us? It can be anything weather related.
Yeah. So I a couple weeks ago, maybe not even, a new paper came out that I was really interested in, and it's open access because it's the Journal of Operational Meteorology, which is NWA. And it's on precursor signals for QLCS tornadoes and high impact straight line wind events. And I thought it was really relevant and cool because we've been thinking about this too. A lot of people have is, QLCS tornadoes in the Southeast are really hard to warn. And if you can combine multiple precursors from multiple data sources, especially radars and models, as this paper does, I think it's really timely and interesting, and it's solely written by Justin Gibbs, who's at the Warning Decision Training Division in Norman, and I just thought it was a really cool paper.
That's a showstopper of a pick. Thank you, Jim. That's outstanding, and we can't wait to have you back on the show sometime real soon. Thank you for being here tonight. All right, Caleb, I ask you for a pick of the week.
Well, other than the OU SEC comment.
Well, that will qualify. That will qualify you. But if you got anything else weather related, we'll take it.
Not really. I could speak a little bit to the aeroecology. We are a couple of colleagues and I are looking at seeing if you could see these birds with radars if you put tags on the birds. That's the idea. And my plan, I actually have remote control birds I got from Amazon. And I plan to put these tags on it, and we're actually going to fly it in front of Horace. And this will not get any lawyers or people upset because they're literally robotic birds. But I'm excited to do it because I think there's a lot of information to be gained from all the electromagnetic signals that are flying out there already, and the radars are doing a lot.
So Caleb,
I said Horace. Horace is one of the radars we're building, so I don't confuse everyone beyond the confusion I've already started.
I had a question for you. My Wired magazine, a couple of episodes or issues ago, there was a story about how the Third World War would begin. and you having some ties to military applications, should I be staying up late worrying about this? The Chinese have got something that can immobilize all of our electronics so that our military force was blind. That sort of woke me up.
I would be more worried about the Israelis and their space lasers starting fires in California.
Okay, good. All right. Well, I can sleep tonight. Thank you for putting my mind at ease. All right. Let's see, David, what you got for us before we adjourn tonight?
I got a 3D time lapse of one of our mobile radar deployments, and it's a YouTube link. You can pan around and see the radar system as well as the storm that we were scanning. So it's kind of a nice perspective of what we talked about.
Well, I was just thinking about that May Day in 1973 when all the great pioneers of radar were out there on the plains of Oklahoma, and the groundbreaking discovery. I can remember Dr. Joe Golden sent me that research paper when I was a high school student, and I thought that was so incredible what they did, and you guys are on the precipice of those groundbreaking technologies, and we appreciate it. Well, my pick of the week will be the registration for the run that Dr. Boyd was talking about, because we didn't really give her a chance to talk about that. But you can, if you have any questions about it, you can call the National Weather Association in Norman, or you guys could just go across the street, I guess, and talk to Janice. But NWAhelp@NWAS.org will get you there, and I'll put the link on there where you can also register for the run, which will be coming up on October the 6th from 3 till 5 Eastern time. All right, what have I done? Neil, I covered you, right? Did I get everybody? All right. Well, is there any further business that we need to bring? Any other anecdotes, stories, anything else, Troy? You know what that's the signal for.
I would like to make a motion, as unusual as it is for this time of a Monday night, that we adjourn this meeting.
Well, WeatherBrains is the weekly netcast. It's all about weather. I wonder if we'll be doing it at show 1818, about 1,000 episodes down the road, when we're talking about the implementation of phased array radar. I kind of doubt it, but we'll see. But we do this labor of love on Monday nights at 8 o'clock Central Time. As you well know, we're on all the different podcasting platforms. You can watch us on the YouTube channel live at live.bigbrainsmedia.com. We love questions, guest suggestions, complaints, whatever you got. They all go to the same place, email@weatherbrains.com. But until next Monday night, when we'll get together and do this again, I'm guest booking officer Bill Murray telling you to have a great week and keep an eye to the sky, because you'll always have something fun to look at. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah.
It was really fun. Who's next week? Next week is Neil Frank. So come back. I thought this tonight was, I'd put this up for the Emmy Award for Best Weather Brains ever.
Really? Yeah.
This was really fun. Thank you all so much for joining.
We'll talk to you next week.
I think David and I could come back in a year when we have Horace up and running.
Oh yeah, you got a standing invite whenever you want to come back.
It'd be pretty cool to do like a live demo of a mobile radar or something.
Yes.
Something, especially with the phased arrays, maybe in a year or so we'll have. And it won't be just the little line squiggly thing. We can write some code and make some
real ones that will work.
See all the numbers and we all go,
oh no.
We'll make some little we'll just fill up the back of the truck with Pepsi cans and
right?
And then we'll show how the radar can disable the flying robotic birds.
It's got onboard.
I'm actually planning on doing that.
Okay.
Any Monday night you got a storm to look at. We'll preempt whatever regular programming is for that.
I got a feeling. I got this feeling Caleb's pretty fun to be around. I just have that straight.
That is correct.
You have no idea.
No idea.
I can't even imagine. You can't fathom it. I miss it. It's been 5.5 years. It was wild times.
Yeah. Right now it's all the 5G towers that are spreading coronavirus.
Yes, thank you.
Maybe when we have a replacement to the 88D network, can spread the vaccine with it.
There you go.
For those who refuse to get the shot.
Yeah, beam it over here to Alabama.
Big time, quick. Yeah.
You'll need it in Alabama. We need it here in Oklahoma.
You're done recording, right?
Well, no, it's still
No.
broadcasting, and there are people that watch it. So, in the interest of self-preservation.
Hey,
Well, on
good
that
night, y'all.
note,
Yeah, good night, everybody.
Good.
Bye.
Good night.
Ooh. And I see that some people, it does amaze me. People are still watching this way after the show is ended here on the YouTube. So any fascinating show. This is the kind of show where I love to go and listen while I'm, driving to these school talks because I'm often so busy during the show that I can't really focus on this. But this was a great show tonight with some really smart people. And there was a lot to learn about radar tonight. So I look forward to going back and listening to this. So thanks to all of our guests for being on the show. Great to have Neil Jacobs with us as a regular starting this week. Former NOAA administrator, just brilliant guy. And it's going to be a lot of fun to have him on the show. But I got to go back and finish what's happening in Studio A. So if you'd like to join us over on Instagram for Song of the Night, our little nightly foolishness, I'm SpanWX. So thank you guys for watching. Have a great week. We'll see